No matter how good you are at maintaining your bike, or even how often you do it, occasionally we're still going to make mistakes in working on your bike, and all too often they become exposed when you head out riding, hitting the trails at the last minute, or even pulling your bike out the back of the car. So here are some of the classics and how you get around them. And the first one we're going to look at is something I very nearly just did myself, and that is pulling that front brake lever when there's no wheel in the bike. And of course what that means is your brake pads are going to push together, can't get your wheel in your bike, straight away you've delayed your ride. So I'm just going to pull the bike out. I'm going to show you a couple of ways around this and what you should be doing to avoid it. Okay, so I've taken the bike out the back of the car, and as you can see in this case, these brake pads are really close together. So what you need to do is prise them apart. Now there's a couple of different ways you can do this. Now the first option, this is the Park Tools PP 1.2, and the job of this is solely to push those pads apart. Now if you do have one of these or get a similar tool, the important thing to remember is that it's clean and has no grease or oil on it. You don't want that anywhere near your brake pads. All you do is simply push it in between the brake pads, give it a whittle until it's sent home towards the back of the caliper there. And what that does is that pushes the pistons back into place. And as you can see now, it's wide enough apart so the disc rotor can slide back into place as it should be. However, you might not have one of those tools, or perhaps you don't feel like you need all those sort of tools in your toolkit. So the other solution is a simple flathead screwdriver. Now the wider the head on the screwdriver, the better, because it's going to do a better job. Same thing applies. It's essentially to wedge in there and prise them apart, but make sure there's no oil or grease on there. The same action applies. Takes a little bit more care to do it with a screwdriver than it does with the dedicated tool there, but you can achieve the same result. And there we go, so ready for the disc rotor to slide back in there, put the wheel in, go riding. Now how do you get around this and stop this thing happening in future? The best way to do this is with a bleed block. So depending on what brakes you have, you can get a bleed block which has a space at one end for when you're taking the brake pads out to bleed those brakes, and at the other end is a pad spacer. So the sole job of this is literally to slide in between those brake pads there and acts basically to take the space up that a disc rotor would. And what that means is if the brake lever is actuated in the back of the car or wherever it is, all that's going to happen is your brake is going to work against this as if it was a disc rotor. No problem. Before you ride, simply slide it out, put it somewhere where it's not going to get too greasy, put your wheel in place and off you go. Now although most brake sets do come with these and they're easily obtainable from your local bike shop, you might not have one to hand. So in which case any old bit of cardboard will do. In this case, from an inner tube that I carry with me, I've kept the packaging. Same thing, you can fold it over a couple of times and that will act nicely as a pad spacer whilst you're transporting your bike. So now you have sorted the brake problem out, it's time to put the wheel into the bike itself. Get that to go riding. Now of course I need to put my quick release axle in place. Now this is something we see people struggling with quite a lot, because sometimes they're a bit sticky, they don't quite line up, they don't really go into place. So how do you sort this sort of thing out? Simply put, you have to maintain these just like you would any other part of the bike. They've got moving parts that have a cam. So as long as you keep these nice and clean, you apply some spray lube to those moving parts, and a little bit of lube or some very light grease, like a spray grease, just on the axle and take the excess off, is enough to help it pass through the axle itself. Then of course you have to make sure that you do up the lever into the correct orientation. Now there's a few different ones on the market. This is the Fox QR15. I'll demonstrate with this one. I will also show you with the rear one I have. Now this particular one is clean, I've just given it a wipe, but what you do want to do is make sure that that cam itself has been lubed so it does move freely. Cycle it through a few times and then of course wipe off the excess. Now you might just want to put a bit on the axle itself. Again, you don't want too much on there, just run enough on there so it can pass through nice and cleanly straight through into the bike. As you see, that slides in much better. A little TLC goes a long way with any mechanical part. Now of course, doing the lever up in the correct orientation is really important. With the QR15 one, the lever should be pushed down at this stage, and there should be between 1 and 20 millimeters between it and the fork. That is fully closed, so that's a safe position. With the RockShox Maxwell equivalent, the safe position is actually following the fork along towards the back of the bike. Now it's important to make sure that you have your specific lever in the correct orientation. If, for example, you're using a RockShox Maxwell and that front lever is facing forwards, A, it probably won't be secured correctly, which means it could come undone, and B, probably worse still, is the fact that it could snag on any bit of terrain like some brambles or something and pull itself undone, and just when riding it will unwind itself and your wheel could come out. So obviously it's for your own safety as well as the performance of the bicycle to make sure that your axles are installed correctly. Give them a bit of love, give them a bit of lubricant, make sure they're the correct orientation and they're secured to the bike. Now this particular rear one is a DT Swiss. It screws straight into the frame. As you can see here, the lever's not in the best position, so you pull this out and you can reposition it so it's in the correct position. Obviously it depends on your preferences. I like mine to actually face backwards because they're away from any sort of chance of being knocked and unwound on that bike. Some people will prefer them inboard to keep them nice and neat. Of course, it's more important with the front one because you really don't want that to come undone. But there we go. So just make sure you look after those axles and keep them lubricated just like you would any other moving part. Another classic is if you're changing your pedals before you ride, perhaps from clips to flats or vice versa. All too often I see people with their bikes upside down like this, and they go to undo it on the Allen key and it slips, smash your knuckles into that chainring. Don't do that, because if that's a really tight fit and you've got to put a lot of work into that, what do you think is going to happen? Not nice. So use your weight to your advantage, put the bike rubber side down and stand over the bike itself. Now you want to put the Allen key into the back of the pedal there and simply lean down on it. You can hold the opposite crank and you can undo that pedal nicely. And then all you've got to do is put the back of it in and just back it out. Now, as well as not actually thinking about what you're doing when you're undoing the pedals, a lot of people actually forget which way round you tighten them or which way you undo. Easiest way to think about this is with rubber side down, both pedals tighten towards the front of the bike and they loosen towards the rear. Keep that in mind and you'll always be able to get your pedals on and off correctly. But one other thing just to add on there is if your pedal threads are dry and your pedals are tightened, they're going to be extremely hard to get off. So do yourself a favour, put a little smidge of grease on those threads, not too much, just enough to keep them lubed, and then you tighten them up and they're easier to undo next time. Now you're about to hit those trails, and of course you just want to put a bit of lube on your chain before you go to make sure everything runs nice and smoothly. Now one of the choices a lot of people have is some sort of spray lube like this one. Now I all too often see people aiming their spray straight at that rear cassette. Of course your disc rotor is right behind there, and if it's windy you're going to get a mist of oil travelling around the bike there. So just do not do this, because that oil, when that gets in contact with that rear disc rotor, it will definitely contaminate those pads and your brake will either howl and won't work, or it just simply will not work. So if you are one of those riders that likes to use a spray lube, just think about it before you start spraying. Is it windy? If it's windy, more than likely you're going to get a mist of lubricant going places you don't necessarily want. So the first thing I would suggest is get some shop towel and stuff it in the way of your disc rotors. Make sure that if you insist on spraying anywhere that it's going to get that, that is going to catch it. But of course, your bike might not have disc brakes, your bike might still have rim brakes. If that's the case, then you're going to need to put some shop towel just to protect the rims from that spray when you spray the chain. Now the best place to spray your chain is at the bottom here. I'm just going to demonstrate to you how I would spray my chain, protecting that rim. Cycle the chain backwards, a little bit of spray just directly onto the bits of chain link that you really want to receive that lubricant. The inside of the link is what contacts with the chainring and the sprockets at the back, so that's where you want to be applying that lube. Now you just want to run the chain around in that shop towel afterwards, so you just don't draw any excess dirt and grime to that chain when you're out riding. Now the best solution really, especially for the back of your car, is always going to be an oil that you apply drop by drop straight onto those chain links. It's a lot less messy, you end up using less lubricant because you're not having to overspray anywhere, and you really can get it exactly where you want it. And it's the safest option for not getting anywhere near your brakes. Now there's a few last things to do before you hit those trails. One of them is pumping up your tyres. Now I've seen it a million times where people, a little hasty, they jump in to inflate their tyres with a mini pump. They put the connector on and they damage the end of the valve core. Now sometimes if you're in a bit of a rush, you can end up damaging valve cores when you're going to inflate them. Now this particular pump is like a mini track pump or a mini floor standing pump in the way it has a chuck on the end there. So it's actually a fairly safe one in order to use before you go and hit those trails. However, not all mini pumps are like this. Some of them, you connect the actual part of the pump itself directly to the valve, and quite often you see people when they're pumping vigorously damage the end of the valve. Now if that happens, you're more than likely going to end up with a bent valve core, which renders it useless for putting air in and of course taking air out again, which is really bad because it's one stage away from actually snapping, which means that air is going to come rushing out. So something you definitely want to consider doing is getting yourself a valve core remover, for the obvious reason that you can get those valves out of the actual valve stem. So this is our damaged one, which is no longer good to use, but thankfully I keep a couple of spares. These things don't cost a lot of money, it's worth having a few in your toolkit. Keep them alongside a valve core remover and it means that you're not going to have that problem stop you going riding again. Now whilst on the subject of valve cores, it's important to always make sure that your valve cores are nice and tight. And the reason for that is A, obviously you don't want the air to escape from there, but B, a lot of pumps actually screw onto the valve stem themselves. And if your valve core is loose, when you unscrew them, you're going to undo that valve core at the same time. And what is the result of that? Now, as I explained, this particular pump has a separate hose, which means once it's attached, moving the pump around isn't going to affect the actual valve core. But if your particular pump attaches directly to the valve core, make sure that you actually support that when you're pumping. The reason for that is there can't be any flex in it, and therefore you're least likely to damage that valve core and more importantly lose all the air out of it at one hit, rendering your ride a bit of a pain to start with. So there we go, my bike is safely together out the boot of the car. Nothing is wrong with it, it's ready to ride. All I've got to do is chuck on my trusty GMBN gear and go for a ride. If you want to see a couple more useful videos, click down here for 5 hydraulic disc brake setup hacks. And if you want to see how to overhaul your clipless pedals, that's both Shimano and Crank Brothers of course, click up there. As always, click on that round globe to subscribe. We have new content for you every single week here on GMBN Tech. And if this video has been helpful for you, or you just like it, give us a thumbs up.